Our last and best presenter, and I have to say that because I work for him, is the Deputy Director of North Carolina Emergency Management. He's the operations chief, and he's going to tell us about, from an operations perspective, how he used all this information that we threw at him.
And I'm also standing between you and Raleigh traffic, so I'll be as quick as I can. My name is Joe Wright. I am the Deputy Director of North Carolina Emergency Management. I'm very fortunate to have folks like this that work for us. They are our partners and do a great job. But what I want to tell you is that before Hurricane Matthew hit, we were busy. We were dealing with already Tropical Storm Hermine. We had our Colonial Pipeline incident 1 and 2. We had the Charlotte riots, the public disturbance that we were supporting. I say all of that to say this. By the time the hurricane popped on our radar, we were already busy. And when I say activate, a lot of people don't know what it means to activate an EOC. Activation means 12 to 14 to 16-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we had been in it to win it for a long period of time. But as we were working these other events, we looked up and we saw this coming. Now, when you look at this track here, is what caught my attention. If you go back and you look in history, you'll find a small storm that took this southern track and then made that hard turn. That storm was called Hazel. So that kind of piqued my interest. But we were still activated, working through all of the events. So we already had a head start moving into Hurricane Matthew. Our state EOC by Friday was activated to a level 2, which means all of our state partners, it's usually somewhere between 175 to 300 people working out of the state EOC. At this time, we had our federal partners there. We already had shelters beginning to open. The storm had not hit us yet. And as we got closer and closer, everybody remembers this track. How many people believe that that storm was going to make that big right-hand hook? You know, I've been around for a while. I was here during Floyd, and I responded to Floyd. I've been here since my first storm was Hurricane Hugo back in '89, I guess. I didn't have much faith in that making that turn. So our plan is we always plan for the worst case, most likely scenario. No, we don't do the zombie apocalypse on everything, but we look at what's the highest potential for the most damage. And there it is. You know, we talk about Hurricane Floyd being the big event in our state, but remember that Hurricane Floyd basically affected one river basin and part of another. Look at this event. 5 river basins, a huge geographical area of water and land and houses and lives being impacted all across eastern North Carolina. As you heard, we rely heavily on firemen and our riverine gauges. So I'm sitting in the EOC and I've got all these other events we've been managing. I've got a team that's looking at me through bloodshot eyes. They're tired, they're wore out from all of the work that we have placed on them for the past 39, 40 days. And we were getting ready to prepare for this event. We already have people in shelters on Saturday. It gets worse. By this time, we're activating resources, we're standing them up, we're moving them downrange, planning for that worst case scenario. But you can see the level of flooding that we faced, the amount of rain that fell across this area. The impacts, you heard Greenville talking about the impacts, the roadways washed away. The people that were in harm's way, 52 shelters open. We had all of these resources stood up. You know, Our Eastern Branch office had about 1,300 people working out of it. It's about $7 million worth of assets they were trying to manage to be prepared to support our local units of government. 779 National Guard personnel, 70 boat crews. We were already responding and doing rescues. We ended up rescuing about 2,336 people with boats, probably about 70, 75 with our aircraft. So needless to say, we're actively engaged early on in this event, but our engagement primarily was in Fayetteville and Lumberton. The reason being, if you go back to that rainfall event, you saw that the water there fell right at the headwaters of the Lumber River Basin, which meant we had no time to respond. So by that time, we were in Hurricane Floyd mode. We were playing catch up. We had that urbanized flooding in Fayetteville, and then we had all the other flooding coming behind it. So we were behind the curve there. We couldn't get in front of it. So we're responding hot and heavy, supporting those counties with their response. They talked about Lumberton flooding. But while we're actively engaged in this response, you remember I told you I was here during Floyd. I knew that if we didn't get out in front of all this other stuff, we were going to be chasing this monster down to the ocean. We were going to be playing catch up the whole time. I'm looking at the fireman gauges, and you know, all of you are in GIS. You're looking at information and you're mapping things, you're charting stuff, you're creating maps for me, you're doing all this work, but have you ever heard of paralysis by analysis? I can't afford to be there because I can't wait till I have all this information. To be a decent ops chief, you need to be able to make a decision with about 30% of the information. You know, anybody can do it if they wait till they got 100% of the information. I can pretty much make a right call every single time like that. But to be able to get the resources that we need to the locations that need it, we have to put speed to need. We have to know where to put our resources. We relied heavily on firemen. You know, it was really our first big disaster where we could utilize firemen, and our hydrologists, all of our GIS folks, our whole risk management section is actively engaged. And they're gathering all this data, and they're trying to pour it into my thick head. Remember, I'm still doing the response to the other event. And I'm looking at firemen, and I realize somebody over here asked about ground truth. You know, I'm kind of skeptical when people tell me about models, and I ask these folks questions all the time, and I ride them pretty hard. You know, you got to show this old country boy. Well, early on, the other events that we had responded to, you remember I talked about Tropical Storm Julia and Hermine? We were able to ground truth firemen during that. And if you notice here in the model that I was looking at forecasted, that was wet, that was dry. There's our ground truth. So I had confidence in what I was looking at facing the flooding that was coming from Matthew. Well, I looked at Hope during the event and I said, well, we've got all of this information through firemen, but it's hard to plan looking at that little fireman map, how to plan a regional response. So I had her and I asked her, can you map it across the whole county so that I can share it with Pitt County so that they're seeing what I'm seeing at the state level? I wanted our local partners to have the same planning tool. So they started creating maps for me, GIS maps of what the flooding is going to look like. And we were quickly noticing we're going to have islands. We're going to have counties cut half in two. We're going to have people that are cut off from medical facilities. We're going to have people that are going to struggle to refuel ambulances and fire trucks on one side of the river and not on the other. We were constantly pouring over information. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me that all this money that John K. Dorman, our assistant director over risk management, had been beating me up for, this stuff's starting to pay off. The data acquisition, the base maps, the natural hazard mapping, identifying what we could face, being able to display it digitally, our exposures, all added up to real-time risk management. Tie that in with our modeling and what we were able to do with our hydrologists to put together information heat maps showing me where the largest concentration of population was going to be when the worst flooding hit them, so that I would know where to put my swiftwater rescue teams. Invaluable. Fireman played for itself in that one event with the lives that we were able to save. The forecast that came out of it, all of this information is feeding in, but remember, I'm still responding to Fayetteville and Lumberton. All this is yet to come. I'm looking at a forecast and a scenario. Not a good place to be when you're responsible to get all resources all the way across the state where you need them, when you need them. To be able to pull together real-time, spatially enabled risk management. All of this information, all of these databases are feeding all of this information in to where we can eventually get to where we can use that information for response and life safety. To be able to save lives with GIS information and all of the information that flows in. One of the key maps that Hope created for us was taking all of the information that was flowing in to develop this common operating picture and put it into a map that I could share with field responders downrange to where they knew what time and the depth of the flood they would face. Because you would think that if the flooding is down in Fayetteville, the next place is going to be here. When actually we had to move our resources way up north and then come back. If you could see the map, and I don't think you can, but the flooding sequence, we were actively engaged here, but our second target to move all of our resources to was way, oh, you shouldn't hit that, was way up here. So it's not real intuitive, and if you hold that light thing, it'll do that. It was not real intuitive where to move the resources without this map being there. But when I was pouring through all of this information and it was all flooding into me from all these places, one thing that I realized was I could not run the response and plan for the next area we were going to face. So I brought in a team and I developed an advanced planning team. We actually brought in a team from Northern Virginia. One of their all-hazard incident management teams, and I placed them with one of my area coordinators, and I squirreled them away in our planning library and had them develop a plan based on the guidance that I gave them. I delegated them all the authority to work with the locals to develop whatever support plan they needed, analyze all of the information, work with risk management, the Southeast River Forecast Center, National Weather Service, our National Guard J2 section. J2 is Joint Intelligence. It's a military cell. They research and study historical data. So one group could tell me what the river was forecasted to crest at and when. The J2 section could tell me, okay, once it crests there, here's how long it'll take for it to recede back down to where we could get across the roads. So we were tying all this information together. That cell was working directly with all of the counties to develop gaps that we needed to fill in this response. Using that map, working with the locals, studying all the information that was pouring in, all of the models from the J2 sale. It was an overwhelming amount of data for them to take in. Had it not been for GIS and the way we could display the information to where everyone could grasp it and share it with our local partners downrange, we would not have been successful. Because what they did was they actually worked with all of our local partners to make sure we got resources wherever they were needed. You live in a resource-rich state. We have resources spread all across our state, and our plan is when the eastern part of the state is hit, we pull resources from the west. And we have the wildland fires in the west, we bring resources from the east. Sounds like a great plan, unless you're standing in a stream, holding on to your family members and hollering for help and realize your swiftwater rescue team is coming to Greenville from Asheville. So we have to pre-position those resources. We have to have them near the area of need. So we have to move resources early on so that they're where they need to be when they're needed. And like I said, we have a lot of resources. So that team is trying to figure out where to place all of these resources to get them where they need to be in time to beat the water, the floods, get the evacuations executed. Having our Hilo aquatic rescue teams in the places to where they could launch and actually work without having to fly somewhere, refuel, and then go get someone. Being able to set up our state medical assistant teams, hospitals, in areas to where we could serve the populations that were cut off from medical was extremely important. Being able to place our National Guard soldiers. You know, we have about 12,000 citizen soldiers in our state that support us in domestic operations. They are our force multiplier. So being able to put them in the right place at the right time was key. So that plan development that all hazard IMT team was working on, they created these resource allocation matrix, working with our local partners. You heard him talk about the conference calls. A lot of those conference calls was to go through exactly what resources you would need if you were facing this event as forecasted through the maps that was provided with GIS. We had them keyed in, looking at firemen so they could see the scenario we were facing. We developed those plans. But you know, one of the most important things is you've got to realize you're working with people like me who are emergency responders their whole life. We're trained in ICS, the Incident Command System. We work off the hood of a truck. We create these rudimentary maps to plan with. Just being able to get GIS engaged early on to where they could create the maps that we needed to be able to plan out the event and show where we're moving state resources to plug the holes the locals have in their response. Being able to share that information downrange was invaluable. Creating plans specific enough to know exactly where we're doing feeding, where we're doing fueling, where we're decontaminating our resources that are out in the floodwaters doing the rescues, knowing where to set up showers and porta-johns, and how are you going to service all of that stuff? How are you going to move around a county that's stranded? But most importantly, making sure we had life-saving resources where they needed to go. So one of the things that I want you to take away from this is GIS-enabled planning and response. I need all of you to go back and work with your locals so that they can understand what you do and how you do. Hope always comes up with ways for me to create maps and tries to help me. But I have to tell her 100 times because we have to communicate. And she's limited by my knowledge, lack thereof, in my communication. But the main thing is I need all of you to demonstrate your GIS capabilities because we've proven that GIS saves lives. Any questions? Thank y'all.